God's protection is not something that fades or falters. It is a divine assurance that never lets us down. In this world full of uncertainty and chaos, one thing remains constant, and that is the protective hand of God. He is not like human protectors who may grow weary or distracted. He doesn't sleep, but he doesn't lose sight of what's happening in our lives. No matter what we face, God's protection is unshakable. When we call on him, he responds. When we need shelter, he is the refuge we can run to. When the storms of life rage, his peace stills the waters. His protection is the kind that holds us together when everything else is falling apart. Sometimes life has a way of bringing us to our knees, to places we never expected to be. We find ourselves in moments of fear, doubt, and confusion, not knowing what tomorrow holds. But God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His protection is eternal. It's not temporary, based on circumstances or feelings. It's a promise. When we walk through the fire, he is with us. When the enemy tries to overwhelm us, God is our fortress. He never abandons us, even when we feel alone. His protection surrounds us like a shield, a mighty fortress that no weapon can penetrate. We don't always recognize the ways God protects us, but sometimes it comes in forms we didn't expect. It might not look like the way we imagined, but we can rest assured that his protection is always at work, even in the quiet moments. It's the unseen hand that guides us, the whisper of wisdom that directs our steps, and the strength we feel when we thought we had nothing left. He protects us from dangers that we don't even know exist, shielding us from things we can't see or understand. While we're focused on one area of our lives, God is working behind the scenes to keep us safe in areas we haven't even thought about. And even when we stumble or fall, his protection doesn't vanish. His love is unbreakable. We may get discouraged and we may lose our way, but he never loses his hold on us. His protection isn't contingent on our perfection. It's rooted in his grace. He is faithful when we are faithless, covering us with mercy and lifting us when we can't stand on our own. Sometimes we need to be reminded that God's protection is not just about keeping us safe from harm. It's about his constant presence in our lives. His protection is about a relationship, a bond that can't be severed. In every battle we face, God walks with us. His presence in our lives is the ultimate form of protection. For no matter the weapon that is formed against us, it will not prosper. We can have peace in knowing that our God is always with us, and that's the protection we can lean on, now forever. Sometimes we find ourselves in seasons of waiting, and in those moments, it's hard to understand why God hasn't yet moved in the way we hoped. We want answers, we want resolution. But God's protection isn't just about the immediate rescue we expect, it's about learning to trust his timing. His ways are not our ways, and his timing is not our timing, but in the fullness of his wisdom, he knows exactly when to act. We may not see it right away, but his timing is always perfect. We get impatient when we're in the midst of struggles. When the challenges mount and the path ahead seems unclear, we question God. Why hasn't he stepped in? Why hasn't he fixed things the way we imagine? But we must understand that God's protection often comes in ways we don't expect, and the wait is part of the process. While we are waiting for the storm to calm, he's preparing us for what's ahead. He's building our faith, our endurance, and our trust in him. Waiting doesn't mean God is absent. It means he's doing something in us that is vital for the next season of our lives. There are moments when we want to rush God to force our own timeline, but we must remember that he sees the big picture. He knows the end from the beginning. When we allow God to move at his pace, we are positioning ourselves for blessings and protection that we can't even imagine. Sometimes we think we know what we need, but God sees the dangers we don't yet see. In his perfect timing, he will intervene in a way that shields us from harm and brings about his perfect will. In those seasons of waiting, we may feel like we're standing still, but trust that God's protection is at work. He's protecting you in ways you can't see. He's holding back things that could harm you. He's creating opportunities, shifting circumstances, and preparing you for what's next. It's in the quiet moments that God is doing the most powerful work. While we might be focused on what we don't have, God is focusing on preparing us for what he's about to do. He's setting up divine connections, opening doors that we can't yet see, and placing us in positions where his protection will be most evident. When we trust in God's timing, we stop trying to rush ahead of him, and we start embracing his plan for our lives. Trusting him means knowing that he is never late, never early, but always right on time. His protection isn't just about immediate relief, it's about his perfect wisdom guiding us to the place where his hand will be most clearly seen. So when you're waiting, don't think that God has forgotten about you. His protection is at work, even in the waiting. He's got this, and in his perfect time, he will show you just how powerful his protection truly is. In the midst of life's storms, when everything around us seems to be shaken, it's easy to wonder where God is. We face moments of trial and testing, times when the winds of adversity blow hard against us, and it feels like we're sinking. But let me remind you today that God's protection isn't just for the calm days, it's for the turbulent ones too. His protection is at its most powerful in the storms of life. You see, God doesn't promise that we'll never face difficulties. He doesn't say we won't encounter pain or hardship. What he promises is that when the storms come, he'll be right there with us. He is the refuge we can run to, the safe place where we can find rest in the middle of chaos. When the world around us feels like it's crashing down, we have a God who is a steady anchor holding us firm. His protection isn't about keeping us away from the storm, it's about keeping us through the storm. When the trials come, we may feel overwhelmed, uncertain, and even afraid. But we must remember that God is our shield. He doesn't let us face these things alone. When we walk through the fire, he walks with us. When we cross the flood, he is the one who holds us up. In those moments when everything seems dark, his light shines the brightest, illuminating our way and guiding us forward. And here's the truth, sometimes it's in the storm that we see God's protection most clearly. When everything is still and calm, we can forget how much we need him. But when the storm hits, we realize just how much we depend on his presence. It's in those moments that we experience his peace, a peace that passes all understanding. It's a peace that guards our hearts and minds, even when the world around us is in chaos. God's protection in troubling times isn't just about physical safety, it's also about guarding our hearts, minds, and spirits. The storms of life can wear us down, bring doubt, fear, and anxiety, but God's protection covers us in every way. He shields our hearts from bitterness, he guards our minds from fear, and he strengthens our spirits to endure. When we feel like giving up, he lifts us up and renews our strength. Even when it seems like the storm will never end, we have to remember that God has the final word. The storm may rage, but he will calm it in his perfect timing. He is the one who spoke to the winds and waves, and they obeyed. He is the one who calms our fears and gives us courage to face another day. In the middle of the trouble, we can take comfort in knowing that God is with us and his protection is guaranteed. Yeah. So when the storms come, and they will remember this God is our protector. He is the one who covers us, shields us, and carries us through the difficult times. His protection is not a guarantee that we won't face storms, but a promise that we will never face them alone. God is with us and he will see us through to the other side. God's protection is not only about the visible dangers we can see with our eyes, but also about the unseen threats that we may not even be aware of. While we focus on the battles in front of us, there are forces at work that we cannot always perceive. Yet God, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, shields us from harm in ways that we often never fully understand. His protection goes far beyond just keeping us from physical danger. It also guards us against spiritual harm, emotional attacks, and even the snares that the enemy sets up for us behind the scenes. The enemy is always at work trying to bring harm, confusion, and destruction into our lives. The Bible tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. There are spiritual battles happening every day, forces of darkness trying to trip us up, to lead us astray, to make us question our faith, and to pull us out of God's will. But God in His grace protects us from these unseen threats. He is our defender, standing as a barrier between us and all that seeks to destroy us. We may not always see the danger, but God does. He knows the plans the enemy has against us, and He intervenes to protect us even when we don't know it. There are times when God steps in and prevents us from walking into situations or making decisions that would have led us down a dangerous path. He protects us from relationships that would have harmed us, from choices that would have taken us away from His purpose, and from environments that would have exposed us to evil forces. Sometimes the protection of God comes in the form of a closed door or an unanswered prayer, when in reality He's guarding us from things we can't yet see. Beyond physical and emotional harm, God also protects us from the subtle attacks of the enemy that try to erode our faith. These attacks may come in the form of doubt, fear, and insecurity. The enemy loves to whisper lies into our hearts, telling us we're not good enough, not worthy of God's love, or not capable of fulfilling His calling. But God protects us from these lies. He speaks truth into our hearts, reminding us that we are His children, that He has plans to prosper us, and that no weapon formed against us will prosper. His word is our shield, and through it, we are protected from the attacks on our minds and spirits. There are also moments when the enemy tries to use others to cause harm or to stir up strife in our lives. But God's protection covers us even in those situations. When people speak against us, when false accusations arise, when bitterness and anger seek to take root in our hearts, God shields us. He protects our hearts from unforgiveness and bitterness, and He guards our reputation when the enemy tries to bring us down. His protection allows us to rise above the noise, to walk in peace, and to trust that He is our vindicator. God's protection is a divine covering that guards us from both seen and unseen dangers, whether physical, spiritual, or emotional. He shields us from the traps the enemy sets, from the words that seek to harm us, and from the dark forces that try to destroy our peace. His protection is not limited to what we can see, but it encompasses everything that seeks to harm us, known or unknown. We are safe in His care, surrounded by a protection that is powerful, constant, and all-encompassing. There is a certain power in knowing that God's presence is a shield that surrounds us. It's more than just a feeling, it is a divine reality that is constantly at work, even when we cannot physically see it. In the midst of life's challenges, we often find ourselves looking for external protection, seeking safety in things, people, or places. But there is a greater truth. The presence of God is our ultimate protection. And when we realize that, everything changes. When we walk through life, we are not alone. God is with us every step of the way. His presence isn't just a distant hope, it is an immediate, powerful force that is right here, right now. His protection doesn't come from a faraway place, it comes from His nearness. He is with us in the highs and lows, the triumphs and trials, and in those quiet moments when we feel the weight of the world on our shoulders. His presence wraps around us like a covering, shielding us from the dangers of this world. This divine presence is a shield in the sense that it guards our hearts and minds. In a world full of distractions, fears, and uncertainties, the enemy loves to use these things to stir up anxiety, confusion, and doubt. But when God's presence is with us, we are kept in perfect peace. The peace that comes from His presence isn't like the peace that the world offers. It's a peace that transcends understanding, a peace that remains even when everything around us is chaotic. It is the kind of peace that guards our hearts from fear and our minds from worry, even when the storms of life are raging. The more we seek God's presence, the more we recognize His power to protect. It's not about running to a safe place or escaping our problems. It's about finding refuge in God Himself. His presence doesn't remove us from the battles we face, it strengthens us to endure them. When we draw near to God, he draws near to us. And in that closeness, there is a protection that goes beyond what we can comprehend. It's the knowledge that God is with us, that he will never leave us nor forsake us, and that his presence is a constant shield that defends us against the attacks of the enemy. There are times when we feel overwhelmed, unsure of what to do or where to turn. But in those moments, God's presence is there to guide us, to give us wisdom, and to show us the way. His presence is like a compass, leading us in the right direction and protecting us from making decisions that could lead to harm. When we walk in his presence, we are walking in divine protection. We are kept from the snares that the enemy tries to set before us. The closer we draw to God, the more his protection becomes evident in our lives. His presence will guide our steps, shield us from evil, and give us the strength to overcome every obstacle. God's protection through his presence is not just a one-time event, it is an ongoing reality. We are constantly under his care. And as we learn to trust in his presence, we learn to walk with confidence, knowing that no matter what we face, we are surrounded by his shield. His presence is our safe place, our refuge, our protector in times of trouble. It's a protection that never fades, never fails, and never leaves. It's a covering that is always with us no matter where we go. So walk in that confidence today, knowing that you are protected by the powerful presence of God. When we talk about God's protection, it's easy to focus on the external battles, the ones that are obvious, the ones that cause us to feel physical or emotional pain. But there's something just as important, if not more so, about responding to God's protection with an active, trusting heart. It's not enough to simply acknowledge that God is our protector. We must live in the reality of that protection, responding to it with faith, obedience, and gratitude. It's about allowing his protection to shape the way we live, the decisions we make, and the way we face every challenge that comes our way. God doesn't just provide protection for the sake of it. His protection isn't a passive force that we can ignore or take for granted. No, it's an invitation to draw closer to him, to trust him more deeply, and to respond to his care by walking in obedience. His protection covers us, but it also calls us to a life of faith that trusts in his ability to keep us safe, faith that believes in his promises, and faith that leads us to follow his guidance. We are not meant to just sit back and hope for God's protection to miraculously shield us without doing our part. He's asking us to trust him enough to move forward in faith, to take steps even when the way isn't clear, and to lean on his understanding rather than our own. Responding to God's protection also means walking with the assurance that he is always with us no matter where we go. It's easy to get caught up in fear and doubt when life throws us curveballs, but the response to those fears should be to trust in the fact that God is with us. When we remember his presence, we find the strength to keep moving, even in the most uncertain circumstances. This response is an act of surrender, letting go of our need for control and placing our full trust in God's ability to lead us through every situation. His protection is not just about the physical safety we experience, it's about the peace we find in knowing that he has us in his hands. In those moments when we feel overwhelmed or unsure, it's crucial to remind ourselves that God's protection is a constant reality. He doesn't just show up in moments of danger or fear, he is present with us at all times. When we respond to his protection, we are acknowledging that he is actively involved in our lives. He doesn't sit on the sidelines watching us struggle. He is engaged, moving in our hearts, speaking into our situations, and making a way where there seems to be no way. Moreover, responding to God's protection means living with a spirit of gratitude. When we recognize just how much he protects us, when we understand the many dangers he has kept us from, the prayers he has answered, and the times he has carried us through, we can't help but live in thanksgiving. We begin to see his protection in every part of our lives, and that gratitude fuels our faith. It compels us to act with courage, to stand firm, and to trust God's continued protection in the future. The more we respond to God's protection with faith, obedience, and gratitude, the more we align ourselves with his purpose for our lives. We begin to walk with a sense of confidence that comes from knowing we are covered by his hand. We are no longer at the mercy of our circumstances, but we walk in the boldness of knowing that God is with us, guiding us and shielding us every step of the way.